the demographic has changed. And so we'll talk a little bit about how the demographic has changed, what that looks like, and then how we as a school have adapted to meet those needs. One of the things that we identify is that diversity is an asset. And this is important to the work we do because it's recognizing that we live in a diverse world, and we recognize that that diversity is an asset for all of us. And there's a strength in that particular piece. And so when we view that diversity from this lens, we recognize at Lake Elmo that's a strength for us. And just want to identify our mission statement. It's to ensure that all students succeed academically, socially, emotionally, physically. We will not stop, give up until this happens. And it's important to think about and identify the hopes for our students and reflect on what skills do you believe are important for our children to learn as we prepare for the 21st century workplace. And sometimes that 21st century workplace is an overused cliche, but again, it's a recognition of the rapidly changing demographic that we live in today. I'm going to invite Eric Anderson to join me as he begins to talk about the next slide.
So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for giving us the time tonight to talk about this important topic. I'm going to start very specifically with demographics and just paint a picture for you. 10 years ago, Stillwater Area Public Schools was right around 10% students and families of color. We just got our MARS data for the 2020 school year, so 10 years later, the district is at 22% students and families of color. So in the last decade, that number has doubled. Lake Elmo is our district's most racially, culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse building in the district. At Lake Elmo, you have 38% students of color. You have 87 English learners, 114 special education students, 182 free and reduced priced meal families, and 4 homeless, highly mobile families. What I'm going to talk to you now about is why is learning in an integrated learning environment an important consideration? So Lake Elmo is our most racially, culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse building. Why does that matter? Stephen, can you click 2 slides for me? So the first piece is around our English learning families within the community. I'm a visual learner, so I really needed to put this on a slide to wrap my head around it. But in our school district, there are 53 different languages spoken, and a high concentration of those families are either currently at Lake Elmo Elementary School or have matriculated through Lake Elmo Elementary School and are now at Oakland or Stillwater Area High School. Okay, Stephen, so you can go to the next slide. So our kids are going to leave our public schools and enter a global workplace. Students at Lake Elmo have the opportunity, again, to learn in this integrated learning environment. And what I'm referring to here, we used to call soft skills, but these are integral skills for our graduates to be successful. So we want our students to have the intercultural competence. And when we say intercultural competence, what we're talking about is that ability to interact across difference, the ability to discern and respect multiple perspectives, and grasp and follow alternative norms. So oftentimes when we say intercultural competence, we're thinking only internationally, but that also includes, next click, Stephen. Regionally, we have these regional differences and also locally. Even when you look at cultural differences between urban and rural, So our kids' ability to be able to code shift and communicate across these different contexts is an extremely important skill. Next slide, Stephen. They're also, upon graduating, whether it be high school or college, they're entering a global economy. And so I want to just show you a little concrete research about the value of bringing these skills into the workplace. Next slide, Stephen. So this is a piece of research that talks about the difference between a monocultural team. And when we're talking about monocultural teams, it's teams that I sort of describe as a sea of sameness. Everybody has kind of very familiar characteristics. And if you look at the performance grid, the performance of these groups, these teams, tends to be very predictable. When you're talking about racially, culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse teams, one of two things happens. If you look to the left, you can see there's the potential for those teams to really perform at a very low level. And that tends to occur when teams ignore and suppress differences. And the goal is, assimilation. You either fit or you don't fit. And if you don't fit, you're not long for that team. High-performing multicultural teams have the ability to recognize, incorporate, and leverage divergent thinking and perspectives, and that enhances creativity and innovation. And so, these opportunities exist in our integrated school learning environments as well. So starting with pre-K, kids that are in these environments have the opportunity to explore working across these differences. Next slide, Stephen. And what this research shows is it comes down to leadership. So if we're making assumptions that, there's this invisible culture within the corporate setting and people should just know, those again tend to be the teams that underperform, and leaders who recognize what I call cultural capital, that there's this value add that's coming with these differences, and really work to extricate that vein of gold in the corporate processes. Those teams have been shown to perform at a much higher level. So here's a real concrete example of that. That was a lot of theory. If you take a look at a Boeing airplane, this graphic really shows where all of the parts come from. So you can see not only are the parts coming from the United States, but there's 5 different companies involved in that part of it. It's Canada, Australia, Japan, Korea, and Europe. So it truly is this global coming together in order to assemble one of these airplanes. So the University of Michigan, go ahead and go through all of that text, Stephen, for me. The University of Michigan went through an extensive study and took a look at diversity in academic institutions. And what they found was that it's essential to teaching students the human relations and analytic skills they need to thrive and lead in the work environments of the 21st century. Next slide, Stephen. Oh, I think we lost a couple there. If you could go back one more. The final piece I want to reference here is this idea of it's important for our students to learn about culture, and we call that culture-specific information. But the real rich opportunity is in learning about through learning among. So you have the benefit at Lake Elmo Elementary School of having environments that are, almost 4/10 of the students are racially, culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse. So this idea of learning about through learning among is a wonderful, wonderful value add and asset to the Lake Elmo learning environment.
So one of the things that we need to look at as teachers and as parents is how actually does our brain work, especially since our brain is really always on the lookout for difference. And when we see difference, our brain has these predictable reactions to it. So if you take a look at if my basic social need is threatened, that whole front part of my brain, that's where all of the decision making happens. That's, your frontal cortex. All of that reasoning is there. But if I feel threatened, I head to the back of my brain and I am in the brainstem, or lizard brain, as you would say. And it's like, okay, I better run, something's happening. Or, you hear of freeze, flight. I can't think of the third F. It'll come to me. But what happens is we can't get at that executive functioning to do our best learning. You can go the next one, Stephen. So what happens sometimes in school is that if we lean into just one way of being in school, children that don't naturally have that one way of being have to inhibit to try to fit in all the time. They don't get to express themselves in a way that is really comfortable to them because there's just one way. And when you are actually really inhibited, you can't learn. You're just sitting there, okay, don't shout, don't blurt out, don't blurt out, don't blurt out. I wouldn't know anything about that, except I would. That would have been me. So what we're trying to do in school is we're trying to say, okay, there are different continuums of how people engage in learning and how people interact with one another. So we need to teach everybody all of the different ways. So that way I can say, if I'm working with someone that might have a different way of communicating than I am, I might say, oh, they're a pauser. Pausing is they're thinking about what you're saying and they're taking it in, right? That's a really valuable way to listen. Now, if you're in a conversation with me, I'm going to step all over you. That's how I process and think. It has to come out, and then I'm thinking and learning. So we teach kids, like how practical it comes out of the classroom is we may teach, okay, everybody, what is the most important character trait about this person in our book that we're reading together? 1, 2, 3, go. And the kids can all say their answers, jumble it all out. And then everyone feels, okay, I got it out. Then you can turn and talk. Okay, turn to your partner, tell them what you think it is and why, and practice listening one at a time, turn taking. So we're trying to really think about if we're only supporting one way of learning and doing, we're missing out on all of the other children and their ways of learning and doing. I'm going to switch that, Stephen. So you can see that over the long term, if I'm mismatched with my teacher or my classroom, I begin to feel that the way that I learn isn't valued. And my cultural, the way that I've been raised in my culture with my family, I start to just really feel like it doesn't matter. My styles aren't honored. And then I start to not succeed in school. So it's important that everybody gets a chance to feel like, oh no, the way that you want to work with a partner might be different than someone else, but we're going to do both of those. So that's just something that we as teachers have been learning first of all, what are the different ways that children learn? What are the different, continua that we have to be conscious of when we're making choices about how we're going to have kids process their learning, how we're going to present the learning. All of that has to be now, when I started teaching 36 years ago, we weren't thinking about that. It was like, here's what you do. Sit down, open up your workbook, page 1, go, or I'm going to lecture and you're going to listen and somehow magically you're going to learn. But we've learned so much more since then about how our brain functions and what's best for kids when they're learning. And so that's why there's been a lot of professional development. And it takes a little bit of time for us to learn these different ways and to practice them. But we've been really pinpointing some of the different ways that we need to be aware of about how all people learn and work together.
So really one of the things we wanted to bring to your attention then is how we work toward changing the infrastructure and policy And I want to talk about some things that have previously happened and some things that we're working toward. Before I start that, I just want to qualify a couple of things. You'll notice that when I speak, I'm a pauser. So I might sound a little bit different than Lisa, just to sort of give you an example of those different cultural styles. And we're talking about cultural styles of learning. And a little bit later, she'll talk about the importance of comfort and stretch and how we integrate both of those. Because we don't just want one all the time. We want to be able to go with both. We want to give people an opportunity to do both. So right now, as we look at this, a couple of comments that I want to make. One, I want to recognize that there are systemic barriers that create racist practices in institutions. The Stillwater School District is not exempt from that. And so it's important for us as a school, as a PTA, to acknowledge that, to know where those barriers exist, and to start to break those down. I need, as the building leader, to take responsibility for our inability to do that in a more intense and rapid manner. I don't feel good sharing some of what we're presenting in terms of the results, because I feel that there needs to be a little bit of greater urgency around these particular issues. Again, we are not compromising on achievement in any way. In fact, in many ways, the instruction and the context we're providing that in will improve achievement. So as we look at making some of these changes, we're talking about addressing infrastructure and policy, because that really leads us down the path of developing a more coherent, anti-racist approach to our instruction. We put these all together in creating greater knowledge for our staff. Not one more thing. We're teaching with a universal design, which we'll talk a little bit about. We're inclusive of follow-up support and application. And there is a commitment to our staff around the work that we are doing. So the professional development end of that has really been the driving force for the work that we've tried to do. And we really tried to take a different approach to the professional development. We were really looking at including a sustained long-term professional learning experience. And we played that out over 2 years, where teachers were meeting in cohorts about 8 times over those 2 years. And what we wanted to do was we wanted the teachers to work together in those small cohorts so that they could talk about what was working and what was not working as they were learning the content. Then we wanted them to take it into the classroom and try out some of these different things. And then we wanted them to come back and say, okay, you know, this was really good. The kids responded well to this. We had some challenge with this. And how do we work together to improve our practice? As opposed to, you know, sort of the traditional model of professional development where we bring, you know, an entire staff together for a half a day and we give them a presentation, and then we expect them to take that and go with it over the next month, 2 months, or the rest of the school year. And evidence really shows that when you know, play it out in a sustained long-term approach, you're more likely to achieve your results. So I'll turn it back to you, Lisa.
So one of the very first things that we needed to do in terms of professional development is define our own culture, which is, you know, like, well, what do you mean? What's my culture? But we needed to be able to create our own, or to be aware of our own identity and our own preferences, because you lean into those as a teacher. So we needed to kind of figure out, oh, well, here's where I am. Now, what do I have to do? And we'd call it comfort and stretch, to stretch myself to try something that I might not be comfortable with, but is just going to be brilliant for some of our kids. So these are just some of the different continua that we were learning about. So for example, this one is huge, and it's big. The first one, individualism versus collectivism, and it's really important in our adult community and our parent-teacher organization community. So if I, like, for example, I was raised in an individualistic culture. Achievement's super important. My family, we just look out for each other, that kind of thing, versus collectivism. The whole community looks out for each other, and you're more, you make decisions together as a whole community. And we are all from different cultures that represent that in different ways. So if I know where I'm coming from, and I know I'm going to lead into individualism practices, I need to learn what it looks like on the collectivism side, and I need to be able to stretch. So for example, it might be that as a teacher, especially when I started a long, long time ago, you do your work. Don't look at anyone else's work. You do your work, and or in collectivism, it's like, well, so-and-so's having a problem over here. So one friend might go to another friend and say, well, here's how I solve that problem. I look at it in this way, and kids learn really well from each other. And so they're taking care of each other in their learning. Just both ways are really good. But if I'm only teaching in the individualistic culture, and I've got children that are coming from collectivist cultures, it's a mismatch. So that's just one example. But so these are things that we studied, the conversational styles, like Stephen said, pacing and pausing. I speak quickly. Some of my children, when I'm teaching, they need me to slow down. And then I have to pause and wait. Like, wait time is a big thing with teachers. Okay, you ask a question, and then boom, you go right on to the next thing. You don't give the thinking time that our brains need. So it's just fascinating. Is there, one of the other ones is like, are you emotionally expressive and comfortable with that? Or are you more emotionally restrained and you don't show emotion? In my family, lots of emotion, right? Growing up. But then I come to school and I'm like, oh, I can't just have my emotions on display, right? I mean, I'm going to get put in it's just not accepted as well. Well, then I have to sit and push that down all day, and then I don't have as much action or as much access to my frontal cortex. So there's just so many different styles that we have to learn about. So go ahead, Stephen. I think the next one is, yeah. I thought maybe the next one was something different. Let me see. Well, that's okay.
And this was the one we wanted to do together, because the collaboration piece is very big on these two areas. So many of you are aware of the fact that a couple of years ago, we began using the green room. And the green room really started as a recognition of trying to better service our students and the needs that they had. And there was a realization that if we were more proactive in that approach, instead of reacting to student behavior, if we could think proactively about how we support student behavior, we could be more successful. And Lisa, maybe you want to talk about a few things that happen in the green room as students come in there that are proactive examples.
Yeah, I mean, as the children come into the green room, they can be there, like Stephen said, for a proactive reason. Like, they maybe can feel that they're getting revved up, or that they need to take some time to take care of themselves in terms of maybe calming down, expressing their emotions. So I just have a story that was just kind of amazing. I was working with a little one who is really struggling to regain their self-control. So part of the green room is we can use some move mindfully practices. And the PTO has been amazing at helping us get our teachers trained so that we can understand some different ways, some different breathing techniques, just I mean, we are in a physical container, and that container can really impact, if we're feeling, out of sorts, it can really impact our learning. So I was in that room and I said to the little one, do you want to try, legs up the wall? I find this position really helps me get grounded. And so the little peanut, I showed him, you're on your back and you put your legs on the wall and you just get real still. You do some deep breathing. And, we sat there for just a tiny bit, and I said, well, do you feel better? And he's like, I do feel better. And then it wasn't too long after that I happened to be in the green room, and he was teaching somebody else. He said, maybe you should try this. It might help you feel better. So just kind of it's okay to talk about how we can take care of ourselves and that we can help each other with that. And then another, instead of being punished, right? So this way it's like, oh, you have some strong, big emotions right now. Here's some ways that you can, either express them or transition them or whatever it is. But then we also now are going to talk about BAR. You as parents are going to hear about BAR in just a little bit. We are just starting that this year, so the teachers are just kind of getting rolling with it, and then we'll share with you a little bit. But just an overall thing about BAR, you may have heard of it at the high school. It's called Building Assets, Reducing Risks. And the 9th grade, and now Stillwater has moved it to the 10th grade as well. There's a group of teachers that talk and care for a group of children. So they get to know them for that whole year. They talk about the children's strengths. It's a strength-based approach. And then you talk about maybe what are some things that you could do to support the child, whether the child is excelling and thriving and they might need some ability to maybe move along or move forward in their learning, have enrichment, or whether the child is struggling with their learning. But every child gets talked about, and every child's strengths are identified. So Stillwater's been a real leader at the high school and has been recognized for their leadership, even just since, I think it's been since 2016, so it hasn't even been that long, but they are recognized as leading in this initiative. So our former assistant superintendent was talking and made arrangements and said, hey, there's this opportunity. And he brought it to Stephen and to Lake Elmo and said, hey, would you think anyone would be interested in trying BAR for the elementary? And our 5th grade teacher stepped up last year and tried these approaches in an elementary setting. It's a lot different, but again, it's 2 pillars. You are building strong relationships with children, learning their culture, responding to the cultural needs they have in the classroom. And then also you're looking at data. What does the child need? What are we noticing? And you are finding the child's strengths and building from there. So that's something that there are only 5 elementary schools, and I guess I would say in the nation, but it's actually in the world because BAR is actually going international, that are doing it. So our staff is really one that is we're the pilot, for creating this program for future elementary schools. So it is just amazing. And our teachers, we had the 5th grade team work with each grade level and talk to them about their experiences of what it was like to really talk about each child. It's a weekly meeting that we have. And, obviously you're not talking about every child every week, but over time. And they were saying that how closer they felt to their kids, how they were better at identifying their strengths. And they presented to each other. And even, this was during COVID. So we were talking about this in May. And Lake Elmo teachers were like, all right, let's get the training, let's go. And so in the end of August, we all had an opportunity to take the training for BAR, and we're just giving it a go right now. We will have, like I said, we're part of what it is communicating to parents and all of that. We just have to get our feet under ourselves as we're going. But so that's just another way that instead of constantly systemically looking at maybe deficits in students, we're looking at strengths in students and how we can leverage those strengths so that we can work together, the whole school together around a child and help them with any challenges they might have or get them encouragement. So that's kind of what the BAR approach has been about so far. So we have coaches, 2 coaches that help us. And they're pushing us along, and our staff's hanging in there and moving along. But we'll have our second full meeting on Friday morning. So that's kind of, sometimes I know parents are like, what in the world is going on Fridays? But Friday morning, that's what we're doing. We are talking about the children. We're problem solving. We're finding strengths, and that's one of the things we do on that day.
Just one of the couple things I want to highlight on the bar piece, thank you, Lisa, is that in previous years, our approaches that we've used, regardless of whether it be multi-tiered systems of support, which is one way we've organized our work, or it was also called RTI, or response to intervention, in another lifetime, we had groups of teachers working together to problem solve. One of the things that's different with BAR is that we're talking about all children. So our goal is to be more inclusive of all of the students in the classroom. The other piece is we bring more of a strengths-based form to the problem solving that we're doing. And those are two pieces that I really believe increase the quality of conversations and problem solving that you can do for students.
And before we transition from the bar program, because Stephen and Lisa are very humble, I've been watching the chat and seeing, wow, with lots of exclamation points, 5 schools, in the world. Part of the reason why Lake Elmo was chosen was because of Stephen and Lisa's steadfast commitment to ongoing professional learning for teachers and their commitment to racial equity in the building. And last Friday, the day after conferences, I was talking to a classroom teacher, and I said, how did conferences go? And she got teary and she said, a mom said to me, thank you for seeing my son in his entirety. That's what BAR is about. It's combining rigorous academic learning with social emotional learning and truly seeing the whole child for what they are. So I'm as zealously enthusiastic as those folks that were putting all those exclamation points around BAR. This is going to be an amazing thing that's going to take Lake Elmo even to the next level. So this last piece is around the work that I do and the interconnections with Lake Elmo. So it's important for me to acknowledge the fact that, I'm in charge of our achievement and integration plan, and I'm a middle-aged white male. And as such, there are blinders, there are pieces, that aren't present for me when we're putting the plan together. And so the way in which we work with that is we have a very vibrant family and community outreach programming strand. And currently we're working with 3 main groups. The first is called NAPAC. It's our Native American Parent Advisory Committee. And you can see there's parents, there's elders, there's community members from a variety of different Native American nations. Those folks actually write a grant for the school district as well for almost $40,000 and do some really important work in terms of authenticating our middle school social studies curriculum by having elders, grandparents, and parents push in and share stories and lived experiences and curricular pieces at our middle schools. I'm going to skip over Caminos for a minute. The second group that we have an in-depth collaboration with is called the Women's Engagement Group. And many of you may or may not be aware, but we have a mosque in Afton. It's called the Eastern Twin Cities Islamic Center. And so we meet quarterly with our Muslim families and again, gain insight, gain perspective, gain ideas in how to responsibly adapt our institution systems and structures. Because the goal isn't assimilation. The goal is shared opportunity, shared responsibility. And the way in which you achieve that is by, hearing the voices of other stakeholder groups. And then finally is our Caminos group. And this is important because at Lake Elmo, you have just short of 100 native Spanish-speaking families. And this is work that we've been doing for over a decade. It started actually with a parent who many of you may know, Mirna Rojas, who came in just as a parent volunteer. Our demographic was changing. We didn't have bilingual speakers in the front office, and very diplomatically, sat down with us and said, y'all need to do better. And we have. Currently, we meet with our Caminos families 4 to 5 times a year. A high concentration of them reside in the Cimarron mobile home community. And so we meet with members of the community. They identify topics that they want us to bring to them. We provide a meal and childcare, and we have authentic dialogue and provide bilingual interpreters for all those meetings. So all those meetings are held in Spanish. But our Caminos group, probably more than any other group in the school district, has lived examples of how their voice has contributed to our responsively adapting systems and structures. When we went through the original curriculum, part of the big message was, we need parents to volunteer in classrooms. We need parents to volunteer in classrooms. Part of that is cultural, and part of that is we have some families who are what we refer to as aspiring citizens. They're still working on legal documentation. And without a social security number, they were unable to pass a district background check. Therefore, we were prohibiting families that we were encouraging to volunteer in the classroom to actually come and do that. And they worked with our district level administration, found an alternative to be able to fill out an application and be eligible to volunteer in our classrooms. The second big part with our Caminos group was this idea of validating being a bilingual or multilingual learner. So back in the day, I was housed at Lake Elmo with Stephen, and when we would sit in conferences with our intermediate age students, we started to hear a theme from families that the kids were pushing back on their native language at home. It was no longer seen as a value add or a legitimate part of a cultural identity. It was seen as an impediment. And, Stephen had come over from Rutherford, had already been exploring this idea of dual language or language immersion programming. And that was a real impetus in terms of us moving forward. And currently, as you are all aware, and Stephen will speak to in a second, we now have, Spanish immersion programming heading toward dual language immersion programming from kindergarten through 3rd grade.
And again, just piggyback on Eric's slide, recognizing that when we worked as a school district to try to determine how to best meet the need, we really spent a little bit of time just exploring what that opportunity gap meant to our community, certainly to the various different groups. And as we explored responses, the one thing we came back to is we had a second group of learners in our building that used another language than English. And so we had to look at ways we could promote and value that language within our program. And it was really the conversations from our students, our teachers, and our families that began that deeper dive into how we do this work. That led us to the Center for Language Acquisition at the University, Applied Research and Language Acquisition at the University of Minnesota, which then began sort of a long journey, almost 6 years, to the development of a Spanish immersion program at Lake Elmo. It really made sense for the community. But again, it made sense for the community to support the needs where the opportunity gap existed. It also made sense for the community because there was a value add to that. We're giving students an opportunity in District 834 to learn a second language. Up until the point of the development of the immersion program, that did not exist. or at least it didn't exist at a level of learning it in an immersive environment. Sure, you had opportunities in middle school and high school, but likely you had to be a pretty gifted learner to become fluent in a language if your only exposure to that is in the classroom in middle school and high school. And no discredit to the work that those language teachers do and have done. It's just to really be fluent in the language, you need to be immersed in it. And that's where we came to the immersion program and the development of that. And that, again, that was something that happened over a long period of time. So we've taken up quite a bit of time. I appreciate, Renee, the opportunity to be able to speak to all of this. I do want to share that I have a unique perspective on the variety of topics that we've talked about in this presentation. When I was coming up through elementary school, I was labeled as a struggling learner and spent quite a bit of time in enrichment classes. And, you know, I was the beneficiary of some really hard work by a number of teachers that probably at this point are rolling over in the grave with the thought of me being a principal of an elementary school, given what they had to put up with when I was in the elementary school. I also am a parent of 5 children of color, so I know what it's like to have children of color in the educational setting. My youngest is now at the University of Wisconsin-Superior as a freshman, and my oldest is working in a school in St. Paul. And so I've got an interesting perspective from that end. And then finally, I had the very good fortune of working with the United Nations in their international school for 6 years, where I learned the value of immersion education. And I also learned the importance of working in and among, and how important that is to learn from people you are working with and exposed to. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to give people an opportunity to ask questions. And Renee, I know you are going to monitor the chat. If there are any specific questions, we can certainly try to address those now.
Okay. Before we begin, Lisa also mentioned that we do have some teachers here as well, so they can also answer some of these questions too. It'd be great to hear from them too if they feel if they wanted to add to the conversation. There was a comment, forgive me, I lost it. It was by Dan O'Connor. And Dan, if you wanted to just pose the question again, it's something that we'd heard a couple times, had been brought up at school board meetings, but it's regarding the immersion program and talks of moving it from the Lake Elmo location.
Yeah, hey Renee, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. So I know that there have been some proposals, and I think there's at least one member of the school board who seems quite vocal about moving the program, and I've been really disappointed to hear that. To his credit, he was making the rounds and swung by our house, and I had a very frank conversation with him and give him a lot of credit for being willing to have the conversation, but he seems very focused on moving the program, and I tried to emphasize to him that my view, learning from all of you, is that I think the program really is dual immersion, and having it at Lake Elmo is a big part of the reason why it works, and it provides value to all of the students at Lake Elmo on both sides of the dual immersion aspect of it. And I also shared with them, I think moving the program is going to affect who stays in it. I think there are certain families who will be able to deal with the transportation challenges that go along with the movement, while others will not. And I think some of the populations that may be more at risk may be less well equipped to address that. So I actually see it as going the wrong direction from an equity perspective. But I'm curious as to what this group thinks about that, as well as what ways we could do to try to have other people see it, because I fear that the messaging that's been wrapped around it is, well, this just helps us reopen a school where we wanted to do that and expand the program. The first piece of that I have serious concerns about, but the second piece, I think is actually it's hurting the program in the guise of trying to help. But I want to hear others' perspective.
And I'll jump in straight away. So Lisa, talked a little bit about the cultural constructs of individualism and collectivism. So collectivism is really that we identity. And when you look at the fact that Lake Elmo has 100 native speaking Spanish speaking families, the we is Lake Elmo is our school. We hear that all the time when we're down in Cimarron working with the families. So that neighborhood school is actually part of their identity and inextricable. So moving it in that regard, number one, I think is a huge mistake. Number two, the whole point about transportation and the demographic changing. There's a difference between language immersion and dual language immersion. And dual language immersion goes back to that construct of learning about through learning among. If we get to that place where it truly is a dual language immersion environment, kids are not only getting the language acquisition, but they're also getting the cultural context that comes with an integrated learning environment. So I'm going to take off my district hat for a minute. Now I'm going to be a parent and speak my truth. I think it's complete and total professional malpractice to move the programming from Lake Elmo to Oak Park. And I've spoken very publicly about that as a parent.
And I can only say, as someone who has been working on program development in immersion education in District 834 since 2006, that the foundation of the program is really centered in and on Lake Elmo. So if you want to move the program, you're going to have a different program wherever you go. So what that's going to mean, and I've had this conversation with anyone who'll talk to me, what that's going to mean is, yes, you can have an immersion program in another building. It's not going to be the immersion program as it exists at Lake Elmo Elementary School. You cannot, it's an oversimplification to think you can extract the program and move it to another building. Its roots and its foundation are Lake Elmo.
And I think one of the things that is really tough about it is that people don't understand that part. I mean, our own staff, if you think about this, as the program grows, some of our staff has to leave because, there's only so much room, and there's many of the people that would be at Lake Elmo are choosing immersion, and yet the teachers support the immersion program. That's how strongly the staff believes in what we're doing and understands the purpose of the dual immersion, so that students that sometimes may have felt like, oh my goodness, my language doesn't matter and I'm going to give that up, like you were talking about earlier, their language is elevated. They are seen as smart and important people because they're able to speak these two languages. And I mean, we have the national anthem is played every day at Lake Elmo as part of the culture, but we also get to sing the national anthem or listen to it in Spanish. I mean, it's really allowing the children to be seen as valuable and whole, and I matter. So that's really, really a huge piece of this. And like you said, if you move the program, you just have this, there's not this way that all of the children are getting an advantage out of it then.
May I add to that? Oh,
Please.
sorry, Angie.
Hey, Jen, sorry. I can jump into, I teach second grade, and I'm relatively new to the district and to Lake Elmo. So I'm on the second grade team, and our second grade team is a very strong team across both English and Spanish. And what we do as a team, we come at it from a team approach as second grade teachers. We collaborate together weekly. We don't say, okay, we're immersion, we're gonna hold off, or we're gonna do this instead. We work together, and we are a very strong team. And I know that due to that strength and due to our collaboration, we bring a lot to the building. And our students see that. All of our students see that we collaborate together. and that's what we enjoy. We enjoy working together and coming at it as a united front. Go ahead, Jen.
So I want the very first year that we started the program, I remember seeing some of our older kids who were Spanish speakers stand a little taller, stand a little straighter, smile a little more, because we were speaking their language and it was important. Kids from English speaking classes, when they see me in the hall, when they see other teachers, I know a lot of them will try to say hola or buenos dias, and some of them will say buenos dias, ¿cómo estás? And you answer them and they're like, I don't know anymore, but they're trying. There's an importance. It's part of Lake Elmo. It would not be part of another school. It would not be the community we have without being a piece of Lake Elmo. Our foundation is the family of Lake Elmo. I don't know any other or a better way to say it. It's we belong at Lake Elmo, or with the Lake Elmo staff and students.
I want to add just a couple other quick things and then jump in, Dan. But we shared the vignette about, adapting Lake Elmo systems through the voice initially of Myrna Rojas, of one parent. And at that point, my guess is we probably had 1 or 2 bilingual speakers in the entire building. At last tally, there are 19 bi or multilingual staff members in the building. And I think the story that Jen told, the vignette that she told, it's not just for our dual language immersion students, but the building has a language-rich environment. And when Stephen was doing the work to build the program, we came across a quote that said, monolingualism, speaking one language, monolingualism is the illiteracy of the 21st century. Really emphasizing the importance of having a second and a third language. And you walk into Lake Elmo, if your kids go there like mine did, you can take it for granted. But when you come from the outside, it feels different. And that's that language-rich environment.
Yeah, the only question that I have is, what else can we do to advocate effectively with the district leadership to help the rest of our community see this and support it?
I think we just have to keep telling the story. And, somebody put it in the chat, vote. There's an election next Tuesday. And I hope by now everybody knows, where people are and their positions on the different issues. And I certainly am not going to tell people who to vote for, but I really encourage you to make sure you understand what's at stake and you vote.
Susie, did you want to add anything?
Oh, there she is. I think she's frozen, Renee, unfortunately.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah,
We'll
we
come back
lost
when she comes. Okay. There she is.
Am I there?
Yep.
I don't know if it's my internet or if it's my dog barking. I'm not sure which. I just want to second or third or, continue to comment on the fact that a lot of thought and effort went into having Lake Elmo be the place for this dual immersion program. And it wasn't as though we just threw a dart at all the elementary schools and said, oh, Lake Elmo's the one. I said, what I feel is frustrating from some of these school board candidates is that they're not taking the time perhaps to talk with the stakeholders. Those of us who are the parents, Dan, I'm glad that you had that conversation with this candidate to hopefully enlighten him as to the reasons why we want this program at Lake Elmo. But the work that went into starting the immersion program happened years before, it just started. We didn't just start it out of nowhere. And so Stephen was part of that. And I got to tell you, I started in the district 20 some years ago as a Spanish teacher at Rutherford Elementary, and I was a Spanish on the cart specialist teacher. And due to funding, the program was cut, and it was many, many years of trying to advocate for language in the elementary schools, and everybody liked the idea of it. Parents wanted it. So it doesn't matter if it's at Rutherford or Stonebridge, wherever. Parents want an immersion program. We understand that. We know there's that value for it. But when we started pursuing this idea further, it took that effort of just the work of where is the most ideal place to hold this, but not just the idea of an immersion program, but the philosophy behind a dual immersion program and why it benefits Lake Elmo and its students so much and why that's so impactful. You probably cannot hold a dual immersion program at Rutherford Elementary. There might not be as many participants in that program. And I think people just aren't understanding all of those reasons why, and it takes a conversation with, like I said, the stakeholders involved to know the reasons. I mean, I echo everything that everyone has said so far about collectivism and the students who feel valued because now they hear the language speaking in their school and they know it's important. All of those things are the reasons why it has to stay. So I agree, we have to vote, and I don't know that I have an answer to what more can we do other than I think what we're already trying to do.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I don't know if anybody has any other questions about what was presented tonight. I think there was so much information, and I think we're now, for a lot of families, I know certainly for myself, we're really opening our eyes to who is around us, right? So everyone's so busy and you've got your blinders up and you don't see who's to the left and the right of you. And now that we've had a chance, to slow down with the pandemic and to really kind of open our eyes, it's interesting, it's fascinating, and me, I wish I had done it way sooner, just getting to know people in my children's classes, getting to know the families that, maybe don't feel like they're heard and don't feel like they can be a part of something like the PTA. It's not just about translating documents. It's about saying, hey, what do you care about? Where do you think our PTA fund should go? It's taking that extra step to get to know a person, as Lisa and Eric and Stephen has said. And it's not just saying, hey, we're pretty diverse. We've got different families and different cultures in our school. It's saying, what are those cultures? Now it's time to get to work and get to know everybody and find a way to work together. So I think and I know the school's been working towards that for many years. And now it's time for groups like the PTA to really step up and do that. Meet the Caminos group, meet with our Muslim families, and meet with the NAPAC group, who have been organized for several years and we just didn't know they were there. We were just kind of like ships passing in the night. And so now is the time to get to work and get to know each other a little better. Is there anything else that anybody, Eric, Lisa, Stephen, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just a quick summary on my end as the building administrator. When I presented some of this, and we didn't have as big audience back in July, I did offer a sincere apology to our families that we have and continue, quite honestly, to underserve. We have an obligation to meet the needs of all students. I want people to know that is not lost on me as the building leader of Lake Elmo, and I take full responsibility to that. It pains me that we cannot do this with more urgency, but I want you to know that we are doing our very best to take on that urgency as we continue to do this work for all of our students. And by no means does this presentation, or should it give the pretense that somehow we've arrived or we've figured out the formula. We have so much work to do at Lake Elmo yet. And I want folks to know, above all, that we are committed to doing that work. And so I thank you for your time tonight and your investment in the program.
Just want to throw one more idea in there. And Stephen, we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but he asked us as staff to come up with an equity goal. Part of my job as an instructional coach is to support the teachers in coaching cycles. And I just have to say that teachers took that to heart. And I'm working with a teacher in a coaching cycle right now, and it's really transformative because they know that this is where we're going. And so they're willing to dig deeper, even during this pandemic, even when starting the school year has been very hard on teachers. You know, they're still willing to say, okay, how do I change this? How do I make this better? It amazes me because it is really hard to be teaching right now.
One of our PTA parents, Holly, asked, is there anything that as other Lake Elmo parents that we can do to help further these equity goals? Do you guys have any other, besides doing the other things like reaching out to other groups or whatnot and just meeting your neighbors, what are other things that we could do as parents, do you think?
I think tell the story so that people are aware that this is a priority at Lake Elmo. And then I think joining the PTA and the work that you're doing. And once we get on the other side, and we will get on the other side of this pandemic, I do think there are some definite action steps that we can take in the building and in our community.
We often talk, when we talk about doing racial equity work, we talk about the importance of doing the inner work before we do the outer work. And so, you know, part of that inner work as the Lake Elmo PTA is modeling. You know, Renee was gracious enough to reach out to us early in the summer after George Floyd's death. And initially it was, you know, we need to bring a speaker in, we need to read a book, and we, you know, and those things are really important, but we kept dialoguing about, you know, PTAs across the country have a certain reputation. There's sort of a certain stereotype about what PTAs do, and it's typically around fundraisers and fairs and those sorts of things. And you guys have an opportunity with a you know, student body that's almost 40% students and families of color to be really mindful and intentional with your outreach efforts, which I'm, Stephen and Lisa are all, you know, more than willing to help facilitate that. And the groups that I mentioned earlier are ready and waiting. Our women's engagement group, I think, is our first big opportunity, you know, to take a look at doing some professional development. They collaborate with an organization called the Islamic Resource Group, and they offer professional development to staff. The majority of our staff have had that training on Islam 101 and women in Islam. And they connect the Abrahamic religions. It's around commonality between Christianity and Islam, you know, and then you get to explore the differences. And you know, we've got a group with the Women's Engagement Group that, you know, when the timing is right, when some of this fervor slows down, let's be intentional. Let's get a date on the calendar. Let's make that connection happen. And for us, you know, I said it to the group that I worked with this summer with the Lake Elmo PTA. For me, as a parent, as a community member, and as an educator in this district for 23 years, the equation is, you know, authentic relationships plus high student engagement plus vigorous instruction. And if we do those three things, then we're unleashing the limitless learning potential, you know, of our students and families. And that's that first piece here with the PTA I see is around authentic relationships. So when the time feels right, and, you know, sooner rather than later, let's make that concrete, you know, connection happen and get something on the books and have our first, you know, delve into this. And I think everybody's going to walk away with the feeling that it was mutually beneficial.
I agree. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Lisa and Stephen. And the conversation will continue. The work will continue. So we will just keep talking about it and finding new ways to keep this work going, because it's very necessary.